Welcome this morning to West Hills Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. I am the Reverend Tracy Springberry, and I use the pronouns she and her, and it is good to be with you this morning. Each of you who is joining us is so welcome with us. You are welcome no matter who you love or the color of your skin. You are welcome if you are sitting alone or you're trying your hardest to pay attention in the midst of activity. You are welcome if you are in the middle of a joyful life story or a sad one or a confusing one. You're welcome, no matter who you are and how you are. If this is one of your first times joining us, and you want to know more about how to engage with our community while we are online, you can write to our administrator and get on our email list. Her email is at the end of this service, and it is on our website. For everyone who received an email in your email this morning, you also have a link to Coffee Hour. And Coffee Hour is the time where we share what's on our hearts, we talk about the service, we do joys and sorrows, and it's a really good time to catch up with people you haven't seen in a long time if you haven't been there for a while, and we would love to be with you. Our chalice lighting this morning is from the Reverend David Dr. Our chalice lighting this morning is from the Reverend Dr. David Breeden. We tender this flame, opening the book, turning to a page yet to be written, opening a story yet to be told. May we fill this fresh page wisely. May we write a new story into being. May we together inscribe the page with hope. Please join me in saying our affirmation. Let us open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Let us open our minds to learn what is true. Let us open our hearts to love one another. And we will now hear the UUA General Assembly 2020 Virtual Choir. Feel free to sing along.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Oh, for each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Oh, for each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of life, and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth, keepers of faith, makers of peace, and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, and and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of life, and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are one. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage.
This reading is by Karen G. Johnston. Humans make maps of stars, choosing some stars, ignoring others, to project our imaginations onto the heavens. These maps shift over time across cultures. Names change for the same assemblage of bright stars. Drinking Gourd, Big Dipper, Plow, Lost Hunters, Sapterish. Humans make constellations by connecting stars. Humans make meaning by connecting stories. Story to story, narrative to story. Some blaze bright, some are faint. Most are backdrop to the great and mundane human unfolding. Let us imagine the stories of our lives as a starry universe above our heads. May the stories we connect draw constellations that reflect a shared ministry that calls out the best in us.
Our book today is Wild About Books by Judy Sierra. It started in the summer of 2002 when the Springfield librarian Molly McGrew by mistake drove her bookmobile into the zoo. Molly opened the door and let down the stair, turned on the computer, and sat in her chair. At first, all of the animals watched from a distance, but Molly could conquer the strongest resistance. By reading aloud from the good Dr. Seuss, she quickly attracted a mink and a moose, a wombat, an oryx, a lemur, a lynx, 8 elephant calves, and a family of skinks. In a flash, every beast in the zoo was stampeding to learn all about this new something called reading. Forsaking their niches, their nests, and their nooks, they went wild, simply wild about wonderful books, choosing thin books and fat books and cat in the hat books and new books and true books and heaps of how-to books. Giraffes wanted tall books and crickets craved small books, while geckos could only read stick-to-the-wall books. The pandas demanded more books in Chinese. Molly filled their request, always eager to please. She even found waterproof books for the otter, who never went swimming without Harry Potter. Raccoons read alone, and baboons read in bunches, and llamas read dramas while eating their lunches. Hyenas shared jokes with the red-bellied snakes, and they howled and they hissed till till their funny bones ached. A tree kangaroo, who adored Nancy Drew, began solving mysteries right there at the zoo, such as, why were the bandicoots' books overdue? Gently, Molly taught lessons in treating books right, for the boa constrictor squeezed Crichter too tight. Baby bunnies mucked up Goodnight Moon with their paws. Giant termites devoured the Wizard of Oz. And Bear's love of books was completely outrageous. They licked all the pictures right off the pages. Tasmanian devils found books so exciting that soon they had given up fighting for writing. They made up adventures so thrilling and new that the others decided to be authors too. Pythons wrote with their tails, penguins wrote with their bills, and porcupines wrote with their very own quills. At the insect zoo, bugs were scribbling haiku. The scorpion gave each a stinging review. Walking stick. A cannibal twig silently devours a leaf. Eating, not eaten. Pretentious, says the scorpion. Dung beetle. Roll a ball of dung. Any kind of poo will do. Baby beetle bed. Stinks, says the scorpion. Millipede. I dig for treasure in my enchanted castle. A rotten apple. Boring, says the scorpion. Giant hissing cockroach. Hiss, 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 hiss. Hiss, 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 hiss. Hiss, 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 hiss. Redundant, says the scorpion. As the cheetah's new novel began to take shape, he read chapters each night to the Barbary ape. And although the gazelle couldn't spell very well, like everyone else, she had stories to tell. Imagine the hippo's enormous surprise when her memoir was given the Zulitzer Prize. With so many new books, Molly knew what to do. She hired 12 beavers, a stork and a gnu, to build a branch library there at the zoo. Then the animals cried, "We can do it ourselves. We can check out the books. We can put them on shelves." And they did, and they do, up to this very day. 3 cheers for the zooery. Hip, hip, hooray. When you visit the zoo now, you surely won't mind if the animals seem just a bit hard to find. They are snug in their niches, their nests, and their nooks, going wild, simply wild, about wonderful books. Now is our time for prayer, meditation, or reflection, as is your tradition. These words this morning are from Mandy McLinn. Spirit of life and love, Holy One of our being and becoming, that which is sacred within us, among us, and beyond us. We know so many stories about you, God, Lord, King, Father, Earth Mother, Great Spirit, Universe, Holy Parent, divine love, deepest longings, covenanted partner. We know stories about our country and its founding too, of the values we claim as a people. We have new stories about those narratives born from the words of people we haven't listened to. Blessed One, we also know so many stories about ourselves, some of them the same stories that we tell about others. Beautiful, ugly, simple, difficult, joyous, useful, worthless. Stories about who we are, what we know, and the potentials and impossibilities of our future. We have countless stories buried too deep in our souls for us to even recognize them. Spirit of discovery, help us find the strength to uncover those buried stories. Let us lean on each other as we brush them off, hold them up to the light, and find their meaning and their use. May our roots nourish us so that we may grow abundantly and flower into blessing for one another and the world. Above all, Holy Parent, sing us a gentle lullaby. In the trees and in the wind and in the kind words of our neighbors, in the warmth of the sun and the sparkle of the snow, whisper to us the truest story you know, and sing it to us in notes we can never unhear. Remind us every day, every moment, that we are beloved, beloved, beloved. We will now take time to sit in quiet reflection or prayer or meditation, as is our own tradition.
This is a quote from David Loy. We do not experience a world and afterward make up stories to understand it. Stories teach us what is real, what is true, and what is possible. They are not abstractions from life, though they can be that. They are necessary for our engagement with life. As the Scottish philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre puts it, I can only answer the question, what am I to do? If I can answer this question, of what story or stories do I find myself a part?
Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. Look around, look around.
How long have you known?
A month or so.
Eliza, you should have told me.
I wrote to the general a month ago. I begged him to send you home.
You should have told me.
I'm not sorry. I knew you'd fight until the war was won. But you deserve a chance to meet your son. Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now.
Will you relish being a poor man's wife, unable to provide for your life?
I relish being your wife. Look around, look around. Look at where you are. Look at where you started. The fact that you're alive is a miracle. Just stay alive, that would be enough. And if this child shares a fraction of your smile, or a fragment of your mind, look outward, that would be enough. I don't pretend to know the challenges you're facing, the worlds you keep erasing and creating in your mind, but I'm not afraid. I know who I marry, so long as you come home at the end of the day, that would be enough. We don't need a legacy, we don't need money. If I could grant you peace of mind, if you could let me inside your heart, oh, let me be a part of the narrative in the story they will write someday. Let this moment be the first chapter where you decide to stay. And I could be enough, and we could be enough. That would be enough.
I have been thinking a lot about stories. First, because the story is our theme this month. And second, because my life seems immersed in stories, even more than usual. Lately, my daughter and I have had so many stories going in so many mediums that I can get confused as we shift from one fictional universe to another. We just finished listening to the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins, and then watched all 4 movies. This is a future dystopia where children are sent to fight to the death once a year as penance for a rebellion, with themes of friendship, loyalty, trauma, and evil. At the same time we were listening to those books, we started watching the Dark Materials fantasy series on HBO based on Philip Pullman's trilogy, which we've read several times. It's set in alternative worlds, and it's about the fight between religious control and consciousness. Then before we finished the Hunger Game movies, we started to listen to the Harry Potter books again, which are about a wizarding world and the fight between love and evil. After the Hunger Game movies, we started watching the Harry Potter movies while reading out loud one of the newer companion books of Pullman's Dark Material series. Confusing? Yes. Sometimes I am simply overwhelmed by characters, their worlds, and their conflicts. Which story am I in? What is going on? Every day, most of us are immersed in stories, in books, news, television, movies, and our lives. As we read and listen and watch stories, we explore and learn the ways people manage this journey of being human. Story is the human medium of understanding. We evolved to understand through stories. This might seem counterintuitive to many of us who were schooled in an educational system that chooses to educate people through the telling of facts, disconnected from story, as if that information is more reliable or true than something that has the emotional resonance of story. My daughter, we are still schooling this way if you haven't been in the system in a while. My daughter studied early American history and the American Revolution last year in the 5th grade. Last spring, when we first started at-home schooling, I sat with her while we watched videos about American battles and negotiations with the English government. She had to answer questions like, what were the 3 reasons the colonists wanted to separate from England? And why was the Battle of Yorktown pivotal in the war effort? The interest level was close to 0, And even I, who like history a lot, would lose track of the details and get bored. Then on July 4th, the musical Hamilton was released on Disney+. That was a story. My daughter knows every word to that musical, which I've mentioned many times. Still gets sung in my house all the time. And as she wanted to understand more about the characters and the events, and sometimes a particular line of one song, she became fascinated by the American Revolution and what came after. Reread other children's books set during the Revolution, including one trilogy told from the perspective of enslaved children. We've studied spy rings and mapped the Battle of Yorktown, all to better understand the story of Hamilton. The list of reasons colonists want to separate from England is utterly forgettable. But listen as 4 new friends share their reason for the fight and watch them make sacrifices for it. That is something else entirely. Stories are how people pass on culture and wisdom. They are how we make meaning. If someone is telling us a story, our brainwaves begin to synchronize with the storytellers. As we listen, we emit oxytocin, the love hormone, the one that allows us to feel empathy. We connect deeply with the characters and with the people who tell us the stories. We are all layered and immersed in stories. Maybe your story life is not overtly confusing as mine has been recently, but we all hold so many stories in us with characters and plots and meanings, and they influence and affect how we engage with the world. They are the stories that we tell about the world, our communal life, and the stories we tell about ourselves and our families. A fundamental way that culture is transmitted to us is in story and myths. They tell us what is important. When I was a child in school learning the Greek myths, I was taught the myths were stories ancient people used to explain natural phenomena before we had science. So early, perhaps in the 3rd grade, my teachers were telling me a story about stories. They were telling me that stories didn't really tell the truth. That was what science did. I believed them, of course. But what they taught me was completely untrue. Creation stories, the stories of gods and goddesses and of heroes, tell the people within the culture what matters about being human. The creation story at the beginning of Genesis has a God that brings the world into being gently through word and makes humankind and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all of the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. This is a pretty different story than the Babylonian creation story that had their deity Marduk murdering the mother goddess and creating the world out of her dead body. Or a common Native American creation story that has animals and humans collaborating to create the world. These stories tell people how the world is. It is a place to be used by humankind, or a place where the feminine and all other gods must be held down at great cost. Or it is a place of cooperation among all beings. The stories a culture tells over and over, as David Loy in this morning's reading said, teach us what is real, what is true, and what is possible. Our culture has stories that explain how the world works. Many of us learn those myths as we learn the sounds of our language. Some are taught and ritually lived. Most of us learned in school that Europe discovered the New World. The people who lived here were neatly pushed out of almost all of those narratives. We celebrated Columbus, who sailed the ocean blue. We learned about pilgrims and the first Thanksgiving. In this story, the native peoples were saviors. In that story, the Thanksgiving story, they saved the pilgrims and then they magically disappear, leaving this blank new land for Europeans. For 150 years, Americans acted out this story ritually in school and at Thanksgiving dinner. I remember making turkeys that had all the feathers on them, and we would make costumes that looked like the original pilgrims. And it was all innocent and happiness, teaching us in the fundamental underlying story, teaching us that in the deepest crises, Americans persevere and will be given what they need to carry out their dreams. In the case of the very earliest settlers, this was the most wonderful country in the world, with freedom for all, which is a story that we still tell. The truth about what happened was an uneasy peace between the people who lived here and the people who came to take their land. The truth was colonization and genocide. Dominant American culture has other stories. This is an old favorite among the middle class. A good life is to go to Story, find work you like, make money, marry someone you love, have a family, and retire. Stories of those who have lived such a life are held up for us to look at with admiration. And then we tell stories about when people fall off this trajectory. Many of our stories are about how that narrative isn't working out and people are realigning themselves with that. The show This Is Us could be read as a commentary on that story and how difficult it is to live it out as different kinds of people. But the story itself, that is normal and desired, that it is the normal and desired trajectory of life, is never questioned. Our dominant cultural story is not, you will grow up and live in your community and take care of the land and the people there. The story is not, you will grow up and study what your family tells you to and marry who your family tells you to and always live close to your family and take care of them. The story is not, you are good, you are beloved, you belong, you have gifts to give the world, we will help you give them. These could have been the stories we were told about what it means to live and be human and have a successful life. In some cultures and families within our culture, these are the stories that are told about what it means to be human and live well. When I worked at the university, the director of the program for first-generation students struggled to convince many of her students to stop living their cultural story that they needed to stay home and be close to their families, and start living a story of individual happiness and career satisfaction. Only if she did this, help them rewrite what the story of success was, could she convince them to pursue postgraduate work. The musical Hamilton is not only the story of Alexander Hamilton's life. The musical is also about stories. Who tells the stories? The characters often ask. Who is in the narrative and who is out of it? What stories get told? In this morning's musical piece, Eliza begs Hamilton to remove himself from the national story and just be her husband and the father to their child. And he refused. And while Hamilton was critical in the creation of the United States, he was, in fact, George Washington's right-hand man and started our economic system. His story didn't get told for the last 2 centuries very often. He wasn't even mentioned in my daughter's fifth grade history class. He wasn't a well-liked person. He'd made a lot of enemies. Last week in our service, Jean Trigstad referred to the Western story that nature is dead and human beings have the right and ability to conquer and take and use the earth however we wish to. This story's ancestry goes back to the Judeo-Christian creation story that gives humans dominion over the earth. The idea that nature is dead is so entrenched in most of us that stories that give consciousness or moral standing to plants and animals often feel infantile to us. They are for children or from other cultures that did not understand the true scientific nature of trees or lizards, we think. We live in a moment when there are so many stories. Television channels and library shelves and internet sites are filled with millions and millions of stories. There are the stories we tell ourselves and each other that add to that collection of stories. It's like we live in a hurricane of stories. In the last 2 months, I have felt dizzy with all the fictional universes I have interacted with every day. But the truth is, this whirlwind of stories is true for most of us every day. It's not just our information society. It's that after centuries of being silenced, those who have been oppressed by Western colonization are speaking. And they're being heard. Those with different cultural stories are telling them, offering counter narratives to dominant Western culture. As climate change and environmental destruction threaten human civilization, suddenly the stories of dominance and nature as dead have been called into question. Last week, Brad Hewitt reflected on the book Overstory, based on new evidence that shows that trees sense their environment and communicate, and imagines human-tree interaction. Felicity Shoulder told a story about beavers and how, as the glaciers melt, they have moved north, using their drive to dam flowing water to hold nutrient-rich soils on the land instead of letting them be flushed out to sea by the glacial melt. This story is outside of our paradigm of a dead nature. It's not how mechanical things work. What is it that is telling the beavers to move north? Why are they doing this? It's outside of our understanding of how the world works and the stories that we tell ourselves about nature. The old mythical stories that created the United States, allowing for colonization of peoples and the earth, are breaking apart. This time of the changing stories can feel chaotic and confusing, but also wondrous and surprising. There are so many ways to be human and live on the earth. We don't have to live those old stories anymore. We can live new stories. Carl Jung once said, "The most important question anyone can ask is, what myth am I living?" In this time of wondrous, conflicting, scary, beautiful stories, we can find the stories that work in this new time. These can be stories for the earth, for the people of the world, our country, our congregation, and ourselves. We're at a time in history when we can choose our founding myths. We can choose the stories to live by. In my story, the universe and life are drawn into being by love. Everyone is precious. All life is beloved. We are asked, what are your gifts? And how will you help your community flourish? Love, friendship, and consciousness can always take on evil and win. What is your story? Let us share with each other stories of blessing. Let it be a dance.
Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Let a dancing song be heard. Play the music, say the word, and fill the sky with sailing birds. Let it be a dance, let it be a dance, let it be a dance. Learn to follow, learn to lead. Feel the rhythm, feel the need. To reap the harvest, plant the seed. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Everybody turn and spin. Let your body learn to bend. And like a willow with the wind, let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. A child is born, the old must die. A time for joy, a time to cry. Take it as it passes by. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Morning star comes out at night. Without the dark there is no light. If nothing's wrong, then nothing's right. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let the sunshine, let it rain. Share the laughter, bear the pain. And round we go again. Let it be a dance.
This is the time in our service when we pause to reflect on the gifts we have received from this abundant earth and the generous spirit of family and community. To consider what it is that we have given and what it is that we are grateful for. And we are reminded that it was love that built the fires that warm us, and love that planted the trees that shade us. Wolf exists because of the generous spirit and commitment of our founders and those who came before us, as our future health depends on the dedication and commitment of those here now. During the musical interlude, please consider the gifts you have to offer our Wolf community, whether it be financial support or the special gift of your time or talent. Know that we are grateful for your offering. Let us speak together our affirmation of gratitude and giving. Let us be grateful when we are able to give, for many do not have that privilege. Let us be grateful for all those who share their gifts with us, for we are enriched by their giving. And let us be grateful even for our needs, so that we can learn from the generosity of others.
These words are from the Reverend Sherry Woodbury. May we have the courage to speak or write the stories within us that need to be told, the stories that make up our lives. May we listen with a loving mind and heart to the stories of other lives, others here in this church, and others in our wider community and world. Let us choose with care the stories that we teach to our children, remembering that all of our stories have power and that all of our stories are connected, for all of life is one. In the name of all that is sacred in these gathered hearts, may it be so. Amen. We extinguish our chalice, knowing the flame of Unitarian Universalism is alive in our hearts and spirits, and so shall continue to light up the world.
Carry the flame of peace and love until we